My name is Lori, and I can't live without risk. I am the Antigone of risk. Without risk, I choose death. There's just depression and a question of what the purpose of life is. I think we're all risk takers. Think of that vagina you went through, that first moment of your life. That was a risk. Sorry, Mary, I didn't tell you about that either. In 2008, I was a student rabbi in a pulpit in the South Bay of Los Angeles, and one of our board members was diagnosed with metastasized melanoma, Scott, Zichrono Livracha. 14 days later, he died. And I had to be there explaining to his kids what life would be without their dad, and I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. And after we buried him, and we tucked him in, and we filled the grave to the top, I said, life is really short. And so I went home and I booked a trip to Outer Mongolia. I had dreamt of Outer Mongolia since I was a kid. I don't know why, it was in my dreams. I used to dream of those yurt-like structures, right? And Mongolians and like Genghis Khan. It was a strange sort of fetish of an 8-year-old. But I had always kept in my heart that someday I'd go to Outer Mongolia, so I booked the trip. And concurrent to this, there was gonna be a solar eclipse. So within 2 weeks, I land in Ulaanbaatar via Beijing, seeing how the Chinese are kind of like giving a facelift to the city and like throwing like nitrates in the air to stop the pollution. And I'm like, I'll be back in a few weeks. I'm going to Mongolia to hang out with some Dutch astronomers and see my first solar eclipse. I land in Ulaanbaatar, I quickly change planes and get this little puddle jumper that lands in the middle of the Gobi Desert. Like, literally, we came in for a landing, and we land on the Gobi Desert, and I get out of the plane, and there's a Subaru that they don't sell in the States. It was like a Jeep Subaru, and inside was a man named Urji, who would be my translator, and a man named Gaia, who for the next few weeks would be my driver. And we take off into the Gobi, where there are no roads. And so we kind of travel for the next few hours. When our gas is low, Gaia gets out. He fills the tank with a chug in the back. He fills it, he puts it back in, we keep going. And eventually, he stops and asks a goat herder a question. And we suddenly kind of, within 15 minutes, are nearing an encampment of, in fact, the Dutch astronomers. So we go, we set up our tents. I kind of hang out with them. The next day is the eclipse. And in that moment of 2 minutes and 27 seconds, I experienced the sun as the closest star. When it was over, we kind of like had this moment at night where we're all like dancing around a fire. And the next day we packed up our tent, and Urje and Gaia and I took off. I had made plans to hang out with a Mongolian family. And in that week with this family, I met with shamans. I met with like throat singing Mongolian singers. I met with monks who read the New York Times every day. And I milked horses and tasted horse yogurt. It was a week of magic, of riding horses across the Gobi Desert, of seeing like ancient steels on the side of rocks. And my mind would not stop. It kept going and going and going. You're 37 years old. What are you doing with your life? You're single. You have no kids. You have a better chance of getting hit by lightning than you do finding a husband. I journaled it out. Finally, it was time to go back. I had tickets for the Olympics, and I had to get back to Beijing. And so they drove me to a city called Altai Gobi, which is where communism went to die. It literally was like a square with like these figurines of these Mongolians that supported the USSR. And it was there that I was waiting for my plane. That didn't come. So the next morning I woke up and I went back into the field and I waited for my plane. And it still didn't come. And the next day, I was flying out of Ulaanbaatar. So I went up to Gaia, and I went up to Urji, and I said, hey, I need to get back to Ulaanbaatar. I got to get to the Olympics. How much is it going to be for me to pay you to drive me there? It was like 1,000-something kilometers. It would be like a 19-hour drive. And he says, $2,000. I said, fine, here it is. We drive, we go, and when we get to the only highway in Mongolia, he stops the car. And Gaia starts talking to Urjay, and Urjay says something back to Gaia, and I see something's going on. And Urjay talks to me, he turns to me, and he says, I'm sorry, Lori, he's saying he wants $2,000 more. I'm like, extortion in Mongolia? And he says, yeah. And so I do the only thing I can imagine to do at that moment. I feign insanity. Ah! The man looks at me like I'm nuts. I'm like, okay, that's not working. I start shaking his seat. Please, I gotta get back. And he just shouts something angrily at me. And meanwhile, Urjay is frantically, he's texting. And the next thing I know, I see in the corner of my eye a Lexus coming down the only highway in Mongolia. And Urjay yells, get out of the car, I got your bag, get into the Lexus. And I run, and I get inside. As I'm swinging the door open, Gaia's grabbing me. I get in, I pull it shut. Urjay's in the back with my bag. And I look, and there's, in a saffron robe, a Buddhist monk. And that's when I start crying. What the fuck am I doing in Mongolia alone? What was this that I gave my life to these two strangers? What am I doing with my life? We get to the airport, I'm throwing money at Urjay. Urjay said he wanted to be the Donald Trump of Mongolia. I'm like, follow your dreams, do what you want, make your life a blessing. I get into the plane on time, we drive, I get to Beijing, and sitting, watching the opening of the Olympics with He Ling rising into the sky, running as the gymnast, lighting the torch, I think, I am but one of billions. Thank you.